So first of all, I wanted to say that I really enjoyed this film. I enjoyed this visual journey through Phoenix. This is, I mean, despite being composed of all of these little fragments, this makes a really coherent artistic statement with very evocative and poetic images, and this voiceover that really brings out all of this really poignant and unique points about these images. Your film is tied to a specific place, to a specific time. It foregrounds found objects and this spontaneous conversations that you have with people that you encounter. And yet it also elevates all of those images to the status of symbols, right? Your film makes us think about these larger issues, about the relationship of man and landscape, right? Both urban and natural, about change and permanence, about decay and resilience, about the living being's pursuit of happiness and the harsh realities that they run up against. And your choice to focus on the central avenue that cuts through the city was really a perfect idea, and it allowed you to explore a cross-section of our urban communities. And not only that, you also, it was a geographical trajectory, right, from north to south, but it was also a temporal trajectory, right, because you thought about memories, about the past, but also about the projections into the future, right, the plans for the city, the young people that are going to inherit it. And I have really appreciated this diversity of life stories, of worldviews, of accents. And as a viewer, I really enjoyed meeting the fellow Phoenicians and seeing them through your eyes. So I wanted to ask you about your process as a filmmaker and ethnographer, about how you discovered all of those incredible poignant connections between images and your interpretations, right? I mean, I was just thinking in particular about that moment in which we see pigeons fighting and I don't know, making love on the edge of a precipice, and then it cuts to this beautiful mask of sequins, right? With people still thinking about beauty at the time of the pandemic, right? So this really interesting connections that you make, that you're able to tease out of these images. And also about how you, as a filmmaker, how you put yourself out there, how you inscribed yourself into the story of Phoenix, because I saw your reflections in windows of the city. I saw you interacting with people, buying shirts or listening to the curator of the Indian school museum, I mean, like coming out to see if, like, what the kids are doing, and then telling her very moving story. So if you could please speak about yourself vis-a-vis the communities that you encounter, and also yourself vis-a-vis the objects of the city.
Throughout this entire project, I think from the get-go, I knew that I was going to end up becoming a character, essentially, in the story, because in real life, I was born and raised in Phoenix, and this project is very personal to me in that way. But as far as like the idea of the reflection of myself, I wanted to pose that challenge not just to myself, but to everyone watching as well too. In the images that you saw, how much do you see of yourself in what you saw as well too? Is there something that we all see together, or is it so unique and split up that everyone has their own perception? And if that's the case, then how do we bridge the gap so that we can all find a way to come together as a city, essentially, right, and move forward? But as far as the interactions, and I think this kind of goes along with what you were discussing with the idea of the car. As I was driving home one of the days, I came across, I was kind of stuck in traffic on the 10, as we all probably have been at one point in our lives. And there was a car pulled over on the side of the road on the left side. And I was driving by so slowly because I was stuck in traffic. And yet I was still moving at a pace where it would have been uncomfortable for me to like jump out of my car, essentially, because as I was driving by, I saw that a flame had lit underneath the car. And so in my rear view mirror, I'm driving forward, looking back behind me, and I don't think that the people that were in the car knew that there was a fire underneath their car or why their car was smoking. So it was one of those moments where I really felt tied, handcuffed, essentially, by the fact that when we're moving at such a fast rate of speed in our daily lives, the ability to stop and to be able to step out of the car or to take agency essentially is kind of removed from us in that sense. And so kind of what the walking does is, like I was talking about reading the city as a text, the landscape as a text, a book, you know, e-readers aside, you have a book and you turn the page yourself. You know, there's that element of speed and motion that we each take when we're turning things. And I think I would associate something maybe like television to driving, where it's on a constant flow. You know, you have a road to go on. You can vary a little bit, you know, on the speed you're going. But in reality, it's really hard to jump off, you know. And so with turning the page and walking, you really have more of an opportunity to stop and to kind of read through the text. Maybe you reread a line twice. There were a couple of times when I would come back to a spot multiple times on different days, and the thing I found there that I thought was interesting one day would not be there the next day, which, you know, I was pretty pissed off about, but usually something would turn out. It would something would happen. And if you sit long enough and you take your time to look, something will happen. It's inevitable, you know.
I think what you're maybe referencing is there's a sense of a tempo that isn't ours that becomes part of that experience. And when we hop out of the car or hop out of the light rail or aren't devoted to the traffic lights and the rhythm of those traffic lights, there's a different pace that we adopt. And that different pace allows us to maybe take in different experiences than we would be able to otherwise. And I think that's part of, it's part of the choreography of urban planning that is outside of our consciousness, but which is really there to help think about how people flow in and through urban space. And I think your film really lights upon a lot of those ideas. And the other thing I noticed in your sequencing is that you would often jump between south and north, that it wasn't a very deliberate, we're going from south to north, and the street numbers weren't successive. And I wanted to ask you what that purpose was.
You know, originally it was supposed to be a directional film. I was supposed to move from South Mountain to North Mountain, I believe was the beginning idea. And then it was like north to south. And then I was like, oh, which way does a river flow in Phoenix? Let me follow that path. And then I was like, no, I'm getting way too into this. I need to just analyze this from the way that I'm experiencing it. And the way that it happened was just being out there with a camera at different parts of the road every day. Certain elements at certain days would mean more to me, or they would have a more resounding effect on me than other days. And so there was no ability to really plan anything, and that inability to really structure anything past this is where I'm going to be today and I know I'm going to walk, and that's basically it. Past that, there was no ability for me to really say this is where this is going to happen and that's going to line up with the narrative down the road. Chance is such a big factor in this film. My ability to even speak to any of the people in the film was only based largely upon the idea of chance. If I was not at the right street corner at certain times, walking down Celia, who was working with tinting windows. I had never seen a window tinted before, and I sat through the whole thing and watched it. It was great. She invited me into her business, and I got to speak with her very candidly. And that only happened because I was out there walking past right during the moment when she was out in her car. If she was inside eating her breakfast, like I had come 30 minutes later, none of that would have happened. And so all of these things occurred, and it was out of my grasp to be able to direct them. But at the end, I was able to feel how I felt about them. And that is, I think, where it comes together. And that's why it's based on feeling and continuity as well, too. You'll notice there are certain parts where I wanted to keep a continuity with the edits, you know. Whether it's jumping via sound, I wanted to utilize sound a lot to be able to transition because I think sonically a lot. And so the ability for me to hear something that sounds familiar at this place overlapped on here, that's where, you know, I wanted to make that connection as well too. So visually, sonically, and by memory. Two big vertices for this project were time and space, and those continue out. But the fluctuating thing in between is memory, which does not completely adhere to these rigid confines that we have kind of essentially built. And that is what I was most interested in, is the way that we fluctuate and move with our memory through time as well.
That is a very interesting way of thinking about it, and I'm just that line from your film about the memory of water really stuck with me. But coming back to what Dan was saying about the choreography of the city and how technology, like cars or cell phones or TV, imposes certain rhythms on us that we have to comply with. Right, as human beings, as living organic creatures, we have no choice but comply with them sometimes. But still, we have these moments of spontaneous creativity or defiance of those choreographies that have been prescribed for us, right? And I think in your film you show, I mean, a man working the excavator, right? And when you speak about this question of how machines move us, and we move the machines, and how these rhythms and routines become inscribed in our bodies, right? So it was a very interesting comment, right, that you were saying right now, that you did not have a preconceived plan of how to experience the city, and maybe some of those spontaneous discoveries, some of those serendipitous encounters somehow coalesced into this constellation of incredible facts that, I mean, connections between them emerged not because of the preconceived plan, but because of your willingness to spend time within these environments and to be open to these possibilities, right? So you're relying on imagination, on your own thinking, as opposed to some preconceived plan.
Yeah, a lot of it, with the idea of a plan, it's as we kind of discussed earlier, I think the idea of familiarity played a huge role. I spent probably 6 hours one night documenting the image. I would write down the image or the file name of each different video file I had written from every day. I would write down whether I thought it was a keeper, thought it was a loser, something I needed to get rid of. I would do a quick description of it, and I would document, and I have like folders and folders of these papers with all that, and I never used them once throughout the entire time of putting this film together, which at first I was hitting myself in the head afterwards. You know, I'm like, oh, well, you know, first time filmmaker, I'm gonna make mistakes and whatnot, but at the end, that ability to know exactly what I had at my disposal, essentially, or not disposable, but my use, essentially, that is what allowed me, I think, to make a lot of those connections that may seem random or completely like off the wall, but it was only because I knew that I had that. And in the back of my head as I'm watching one thing, it's just putting myself, like my body was on Central Avenue, and my mind was there as well too, and it still remained there. Looking through the footage, the memories of it still were there, and so that's how I connected these little dots, you know, A to B.
One of the things that also stood out to me across the film are these juxtapositions of new developments, so the excavation, but then there are these natural spaces that are also inhabited by humans and ducks, and we, as we move through the space of the film, we begin to draw some value judgments based on what is beautiful, what doesn't exist inside our realm of the aesthetic pleasure of something. And I began thinking about, well, that was the postmodern regional architecture.
Yeah, that's the aesthetic.
As a type of counterpoint to that natural space where those ducks and that man live together, right? And that there's something about those two images that are really intertwined. And I wonder if you could comment on that. I'm thinking in the course that you took with me, we ended the course with conversations about the notion of obsolescence and the notion of emergence.
Sometimes as I was walking around too, I would look at buildings and kind of play a game with myself and ask myself how long that building would be there, essentially. There are other things that you can see walking through Central Avenue where they've been there, there's history. There's one building downtown called the Lures Building, and that building was actually across the street from the one that Hitchcock shot Psycho, and I have to thank Jose for bringing the Psycho Hitchcock reference to my attention. But yeah, so Hitchcock filmed the downtown skyline, and so after he brought that up, I went and rewatched Psycho. And at the beginning, it shows Phoenix, Arizona, you know, and the pan shot over the Phoenix skyline, and it looks nothing like it does now. And that wasn't that long ago. There was only 1 or 2 buildings that I could still pick out there, essentially. And that was interesting to me because the idea of something that can change, or why do we build?
Right.
Is it for right now, or is it supposed to last? And if it's supposed to last, then does that affect the way that we build things then kind of as well too? And what's the goal? You know, longevity or kind of a quick turnaround, something that can generate maybe some profit in the meantime. I was kind of still stuck on the Psycho thing. I thought it was interesting too that Hitchcock shot Psycho in Phoenix too, where that idea of heat, I forget what her name is, that played the main character in that movie, who got stabbed in the shower. What is her name? Janet Leigh, yeah. Anyways, why did she steal the money? And it's December when they open up, and she has just had this little affair in a hotel room, and it's sweaty. They're all sweating, obviously because of the physical activity, but also probably because Hitchcock is saying something about the heat. There's something to do with the heat that maybe drives people mad or something like that as well too. And so I wanted to touch on that, and I had a couple parts together. I didn't have enough to flesh out something there, but there's something interesting, I think, also about that idea of heat being an instigator of something, like the bubbles when you're boiling water, right? The only way that sometimes things move or things happen is because of an instigator, like heat or something, you know? So.
Well, I guess that brings up the question of how you might see this film differently had you done it in the months of July and August. And what would that experience have been?
That one, there would just be sweat dripping down the camera lens. I got very lucky. But before, an earlier cut of this said that the entirety of this was filmed during a 2-week sequence between an exceptionally windy February and March. And it was very windy. It was extremely windy. There was a part that I cut out that has construction crews battling against the wind because it's blowing over all their barriers, which was hilarious. But but that aspect of it allowed me to stay out on the road for 12, a long time every day, basically, you know. Doing it right now, even walking around, I couldn't do it. I don't know if I'm getting old. My body is not able to put up with that type of pain.
Well, you would probably add layers of Kevlar, and so think of yourself as a futuristic kind of.
Yeah, like a time traveler? Yeah. I'm a cosmonaut, for sure, of the streets.
So Ryan, you have ended your film with this interesting image of lights dissolving on Central Avenue, and you spoke of synapses emerging in the brain, right? And this, which for me brought up this idea of the plasticity of the brain, right? The fact that our brain basically rewires itself with every new experience, with every new memory that is basically reconstructed as we are thinking it. So I was wondering, in what way was the creation of this film a transformative experience for you? What is the new avenue that it opened in you?
My friend Dan will attest to this. Driving down Central Avenue with me now is a pain, and no one should do it because all you'll hear is all the things that I know about Central Avenue. Point out the street corner and, oh yeah, they make great chicken here. Or like here, this place, like the waitress is super nice at this restaurant, you should go there. But that type of idea of a city is something that I didn't have before. I think we discussed the fact that for a long time I felt very alienated in Phoenix. I didn't feel like this was my city, even though I had spent so much time here in my life. I had no connection to it. And that kept going on for a long time. This project was one that transformed my vision of Phoenix because it transformed myself in the process. And my ability to go and the wear and tear, like that's why I wanted to capture the Nikes at the beginning, the shoes I wore. I wanted to capture the bandanas I wore on my neck to protect from sunburn. I wanted to show you the physical things that were a part. But you see my reflection, but you don't see like my body, the wear and tear like on my spine, for example, or like carrying a camera around all day, like maybe my biceps are bigger, right? And so there are physical changes that I wish they didn't get that big. But there are physical changes that take place in me while I am documenting this kind of physical environment as well too. And that happens both physically and mentally. And so the mental aspect I think was huge. It changed my perspective of the city that I live in, and I have a newfound respect in it because I realize that, I have a stake in it, and it is a part of me, and I don't feel that disconnected from it anymore. So I've taken ownership of it because I put myself out there and into it, so.
I want to start with a little praise and a little love because I feel like questions are always inherently critical. So 2 points of the film I really loved are the man with the birds living and not naming the birds. When you asked him what he named them and he says he doesn't name them, it reminded me a lot of Ursula Le Guin's She Unnames Them, where it's not what you're labeled as, it's how you exist that's important. And I also really enjoyed this beautiful quote that pigeons don't pay rent, but they can still get evicted. My question comes from a particular moment at the beginning of the film. You mentioned, as someone naive to Phoenix history, you mentioned this biblical flood that divided Phoenix between north and south. And so for the rest of the film, I was really searching for that. And I think there's moments with the lady who tints windows in District 7 mentioning that they're in South Phoenix. There's moments I looked for with like the addresses and stark differences between north and south. Like there's certain moments of green, there's certain moments of desert, there's all these stark contrasts. But I have a question basically, is the film meant to show these differences between North and South Phoenix? Is it meant to show how North and South Phoenix are currently blending and maybe there isn't so longer a divide, or is it not really focusing on that divide at all and just I'm too stuck on that moment in the past and it's showing me a moment right now?
I think the idea of a divide is interesting because that's kind of exactly what I wanted to stay away from in this film, is making it too contrastive or too comparative, binary, if you will. This is what it's like over here. This is what it's like over here. The ability, and that's why I started the film, that was a conscious decision to start at the bridge between the two. I wanted to start somewhere in the middle, somewhere where there is a possibility for a connection, but also to acknowledge the fact that that connection has been destroyed so many times. And then also, are connections just made physically, or are connections emotional connections as well too? And which are stronger and which are easier to break, I think is an interesting question to pose. With those animals, the images of the murals painted under the bridge, to me when I saw that, it looked like someone had painted those murals almost as bandages, or almost as some healing salve that would somehow protect the bridge from being destroyed, and thus the connection between North and South Phoenix would be forever, taken away again. But then there's the high water mark painted foot by foot as well too, and so for me that was just a very direct warning that even though we can reinforce a bridge, we can build dams to stop the water, if anything did happen, our ability to remain as a united Phoenix, or call it what you will, a Phoenix that has a connection between it, is still in danger of being ruptured at any moment by natural forces, so yeah. It's not to do a compare contrast essentially with North and South, it's more to show that even in the furthest north, there are things to talk about. And even in the deepest part of South Phoenix, there's still, beauty and so much of it actually to be found as well too, so yeah.
Hello. Okay, so I am glad that you touched on the element of bringing in the theme song. That was lovely by Jose in the moments that you were feeling childlike. And that you were seeing something that was completely new to you. But I'm curious, what was the moment along the way for you that was the most delightful or the most dazzling? Like, what was a moment that you were just overwhelmed and excited? I've had the opportunity of living just off of Central Avenue on 3rd Avenue myself, and I've walked all of those streets because of COVID. Like, I just was getting out, and I've had many of those moments for myself, and things that you discovered along the way have become a part of my natural route as well. And so I'm just curious, like, what delighted you? The
aspect of interviewing people for me was very it was great afterwards, but in the meantime, I was terrified of talking to people on the street. At the beginning, I wasn't going to talk to anybody, essentially. This was just going to be me walking down Central Avenue, pointing stuff out, and then, calling it a day. But it was only through these encounters that I had randomly with people that I really felt, every time that I talked to someone, I felt like I had gained some knowledge or some other perspective, essentially. And that gaining of different perspectives was really what kind of made me feel the best. I get really nervous when I'm talking to strangers, and I don't like approaching people like that. I would rather let people do what they're gonna do and then me just sit back and kind of write my stuff and do that, But I know, and because of that, I noticed that every time I was about to approach someone, I started humming on camera. I was like, It's a thing I noticed. I do it. I hum when I'm in a nervous or an uncomfortable situation. And I did that, and I had to edit that out of so many audio clips throughout here, because I was very nervous, and I was very uncomfortable doing a lot of this and really putting myself out there. The minute you put a camera in front of people on a street, you're not gonna be greeted with people that are generally happy to see it. It's kind of a scary thing. It makes people question themselves and their environment, and why is this important to film? Is he filming me? Why? Do I look different? And so it is nerve-wracking. But the gratification after talking to those people, I spoke to more people that I had never met, more strangers over these past 2 months than I've spoken to over the past 2 years. And that is a really good feeling. And that's something that I didn't know I was missing in my life, essentially, until I had done this film. So it was tough at the beginning of getting those interviews, but after I had spoken to those people, it felt really great.
Hi Ryan, that film was beautiful, and I'm so happy that I got to be here today and experience it.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, my question for you is, you touched a lot, or a little bit, on how change has happened in the Phoenix community. And I was wondering if you believe that the change begins on Central Avenue, or does Central Avenue reflect the change that's happening around it in the city? And with that being said, how does that change transcend past the north and south points of Phoenix?
Very good question, and a difficult one as well, too.
So sorry.
Central Avenue doesn't just end at the points of North and South Mountain. It actually continues on. I found it in Ahwatukee. I was like, what the hell? How am I going to document this? This is totally separate. So the goal was to document a contiguous 15-mile stretch of Central Avenue. In this Q&A I had in my head, someone's like, well, why did you walk 7th Avenue? It's longer. You could have done that. You would show more stuff. I'm like, man, come on, I can't walk that long. You got to give me a break. But yeah, no, there are 100 different ways that this project itself, an idea of a project based on change, could have been done. For me, Central Avenue was always a road that I drove where I felt the changes happening very quickly around me as I was driving. Even moving from just downtown to South Central, not even South Phoenix yet, but South Central, the changes within even 5 streets are so dramatic and so pronounced that it became very obvious that driving is one thing to see it, but to see those changes as they progress on the road would be a great slow process of kind of checking them out. And so does change start at Central Avenue? I think change, as I've shown, I think a lot in here, what is a question of what is change, Is change based just on the way we construct buildings? Is a new building change? Or is change a progressive attitude towards politics? Is change based on one person's idea, or does change require all of us to agree that we're changing, we're gonna make this happen, right? And so I think in reality, what this does is it says, I don't know what change is, and I don't know if anyone can really put their finger completely on what that idea is. But what it can do is show transience. It can show something in the middle that is in motion. And so doing this film is kind of like jumping on a moving train, essentially, and trying to see where it takes me. And so I think Central Avenue provides the best way to view change, I think, in Phoenix, because it cuts through so many different neighborhoods and such a diverse population of people and landscapes as well, too. And so that's really where I wanted to, stake my claim for the film. Thanks.
There's a
Jake, I
question
think we
in
have
front.
some.
Oh, perfect.
We're making him run.
Thanks for that.
Now someone raise your hand back there.
Like 50 miles, so your next film.
Sorry, Jake.
Yeah, so great film. So I really liked the All-State Jesus image, the back and forth. I thought that was really clever. I took it in a comedic sense, but I wanted to know what you thought. So I took it as you're in good hands with Jesus. But I wanted to know what you thought about it.
Isn't it so strange how similar the imagery was between like the open hands, right, of Christ and then the all-state hands? Somewhere there is an advertising designer that is just laughing their head off at like, oh, they just figured out my trick. Like, I just photoshopped Jesus's hand together twice and that's my logo, which is genius, to be honest. If you think of the idea of Christ and this idea, the Christian idea of opening your hands and your hearts essentially to other people, I mean, that's great advertising. And I think that's kind of what I really wanted to touch on was the idea that this guy out here with a bullhorn, yelling at people while they're shopping for their produce, it becomes blurry. It's hard to pick out what he says. There are only a couple things that you can hear because it's so muffled, it's so loud, and it's constant. There's not a moment where he let up the entire time that I was there. And that moment for me felt a lot like advertising. The way that you could turn on a television and the drone, right? You can walk away from your television at commercial breaks and feel, you can hear it in the other room, but you don't, have you had those moments where you don't exactly know what they're talking about, but you kind of know what they're talking about? That essentially is how that functioned for me. It was very muffled. You couldn't pick out, but you knew that it was about God or religion or whatever, he was working on at that point. And because of that, I wanted to test that idea out essentially, on people, is flashing these images really quickly. How does that tie things together? And if it's so fast that no one can really sit and think about it, does it still leave an impact on them? Like, does advertising leave an impact when you can skip an ad on YouTube after only 10 seconds, There has to be something to it, right? If they're gonna let you skip it, there has to be something within those first 10 seconds that means something. Otherwise, they wouldn't let you do that. So anyways.
Thank you.
The scene with the carvings in the tree of the lovers, that hit for me. That served as a huge nostalgic piece for me. I think for most of us, we've all in a desk or somewhere put somebody's initials that were close to us. 2 questions. One, does any particular young relationship stand out to you that made you put that in the film? And 2, did you think of the song Lover's Carvings by Bibio when you put that in?
Yes, actually, one iteration of this had the word Lover's Carvings as part of the dialogue that I was going to do over it. So yeah, nice. We're on the same page. As far as old relationships go, I don't think I've had a relationship ever long enough to actually inscribe anything. So when I get to that point, then we can talk about where we're going to inscribe our names. But until now, I haven't had to deal with that. So maybe that's a good thing, right? The inscriptions, that was the closest thing to I think a Hitchcock moment that I had in the film because of the score. The minute that I started putting that kind of 4x4 bass tone with that kind of the string but distorted strings over it, it really kicked that moment into something that felt beyond. It expressed emotion over time, essentially, right? Is there still love in that heart of Steve and Heidi on that tree? Is there still love between them because they're still here on the tree? That idea of is there beauty in scars, and does beauty require some sort of destruction to actually occur? For me, I know for this film, I kind of had to destroy myself a little bit. The last final weeks, it was smoking 6 cigarettes a day just to get out of the room and whatnot, and I could see it on my face. I was kind of destroying myself. That's the process. But in the meantime, as I'm doing something like this, looking at this tree, there's nobody else in this whole business complex. It's great, green, beautiful grass and this beautiful tree that's been there for a long, long time. And the only thing that's there are not people, but the remnants and the memories of the people and their relationships. And so for me, that was it spoke louder than any crowd of people in the place I think could have done, because it's that tracing of love. It's the remembrance and the memories left. So I thought that for me, that I think was an important way to look at that. Thank you. Can we also give a round of applause to Rosalie as well, too, from the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center, who is so gracious with her time with me. Also, Jose as well, too, is here, who is the maestro on the piano. Beautifully done. Thank you so much. Watching him work was great. And again, thank you to everyone else, and both Doctors Gilfillan and Olenina for being here with me. I appreciate that, having them at my side throughout this whole process. And to my family and all my friends and everybody else out there, thank you so much for coming. It was great to see all of you.